Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to the bunker. This time you made me watch Jacob's Ladder, the classic psychological thriller from 1990. This one was requested on Patreon by Joseph Karutz, so thanks very much to you. Jacob's Ladder is one of those required viewing movies that I never realized was required viewing. I must have heard it referenced here and there over the years. The title and some of the images kind of rang a bell for me, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I started in on this one. When I wasn't totally wrapped up in the strange, confusing, disturbing, and visceral ride it took me on, which was most of the time, I found myself noticing how influential it must have been on other movies, especially horror films and thrillers. The figure with an undefinable face violently wigging out all over the place is a horror staple now, an image a lot of jump scare movies fall back on when they can't think of anything else to freak you out with, and often accompanied by such unrelenting noise, they seem to be just trying too hard. I was impressed with how effective that image still is in this, despite the umpteenth times I've seen it used less effectively. This really stood up, I thought. It's always thrown in scenes quickly in this and subtly in otherwise normal settings, often accompanied by one or two other bizarre happenings, giving the impression that Jacob, our protagonist, keeps having his reality invaded by the supernatural, which is more unnerving than when the supernatural just takes over completely. Something about other people being in a scene with Jacob, not noticing the horrors and just going on with life, sometimes even when they seem to be part of the horrors, particularly at the house party when Jacob's girlfriend seems to dance with and get intimate with a creepy tentacle creature, makes it all so much worse. This movie was released in 1990, and one of my major takeaways was how effective it still is at creeping me the heck out. This is still kind of scary, regardless of how much I realized it influenced other things like survival horror games, like Silent Hill, and oddball directors like James Gunn early in his career. I would imagine that didn't lessen the impact for me because the movie establishes such a high bar of quality in its surreal setups, its sense of POV, always staying in its protagonist's head and making me feel like I'm going through what he's going through right along with him, and in the variety of creative choices and the problems that plague Jacob, from his guilt over his son's death to his PTSD about his part in the Vietnam War to the conspiracy he thinks he's uncovering about hallucinogenic drugs he was secretly given in Vietnam, to his constant questioning of reality as he experiences nightmarish imagery in his everyday life. And while he appears to be hopping back and forth between several versions of his life, I found myself immersed in Jacob's plight from the beginning, constantly working to piece together what was real and what wasn't. And Tim Robbins, one of the protagonists in The Shawshank Redemption, which I just reviewed coincidentally, I first saw him in Howard the Duck. He's infinitely better in both of these movies, gives such a lonely and lost performance that I'm desperate to see him figure out what's really going on and to sort out realities and live a normal life at the end. Spoiler alert, that doesn't happen. So what does happen? Heck if I know for sure. We've got a Twilight Zone or an X-Files sort of ending here. And again, I'm going to spoil the big stuff in this movie, so if you don't want to know about it, make sure you watch this before you finish this video. It's the one thing modern viewers well-versed in horror might roll their eyes at now, because we hadn't been inundated with this twist for decades prior to this, like with things like The Sixth Sense. But this is one of those he was dead the whole time endings. At least I'm pretty sure that's what's going on. As interested as I was in the conspiracy and the intrigue and the metaphysical questions here, at the end of the day, there is no concrete answer as to what is actually happening through virtually any of this movie. And usually I'd call that a cop-out. Oh, it's just a bunch of random trippy stuff that happens. The end. Make of it what you will. But taking it on its own terms, I realize this is not a traditional narrative. And I've watched other stuff that tries to do this kind of thing, and I'm still not buying it. I think this handles it better than a lot of stuff. It's not about rising action or linear actions and consequences, really, or self discovery or an opportunity for change. It's about a surreal experience the movie wants us to go on. It's about feeling the same grief and shame and fear and frustration and terror our protagonist does. It's about feeling out of control, both because of what we can't control in the moment and can't change, like the death of a child, and how we are a slave to our chemical processes, like the way Jacob can't help but lose himself to the drug that makes him murder some of his platoon in Vietnam. It's about everyone's relative perspective on death. Depending on what point of your life you're at, you may find death a nightmare or a release. There's a whole speech about that keeps coming back through the movie. And it's about all the complexities of life. How sometimes you feel like this just can't be happening to you. Like in this moment, you must be dreaming, even when you know you're not. And dreams that feel so real you can't believe that you've just woken up from them. And how life is a blend of heaven and hell. One moment is bliss, the next absolute torture. I experienced such a wide range of feelings watching this. I found it so powerful in a lot of its moments that I can't say it wasn't effective, even if I'm not sure what actually happened by the end. I usually hate that. Generally, like I said earlier, it's a cheat. And yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, I don't like that I watched this guy with his girlfriend and then wake up with his wife and 3 kids, including an uncredited Macaulay Culkin who is dead in the other reality, who is in, by the way, a surprising number of scenes to not have his name on the movie. This is before he was a phenomenon, of course, but I mean, he actually gives kind of a performance in this. And I don't have enough clues to say whether I think one life or the other is the real one. I mean, that is really frustrating. The blissful life seems to represent heaven, and Jacob goes up a staircase toward a bright light with the living version of the kid who died in a bike accident at the end. So I'm assuming that's not his real life, but I mean, anything is possible. Maybe that's what's actually happening and everything else is a hallucination, because we know he's been on these hallucinogenic drugs, but we also get this scene at the end where it seems like he's been dead the whole time. So I mean, and maybe all of it's in his head. None of it seems to be real at all. Again, we find out that he died in 1971 in Nam, apparently, and the film's main action between several seemingly different realities takes place 4 years after that, in 1975. And I also don't love that I'm getting all roped up in the intrigue of this off-the-books drug program in the army Jacob starts to uncover with his friends from the war, all of them who are also going through the same thing that he is. I don't know if that's true or not until someone gets to the rest of them and they stop looking into it. And his lawyer, played by Jason Alexander of all people, he's great in this, suddenly doesn't believe that he was even in the war, much less that he was drugged, and he gets picked up by some thugs on the street for snooping around. And none of that pays off. I mean, none of it ends up mattering because, again, it turns out he's been dead the whole time. But I have just enough to go on that I don't find myself dismissing all the details either. Yes, the point of the film is going through all the turmoil and pain with Jacob, almost like if the creepy boat ride scene in Willy Wonka was an entire movie. But if that's all it was, I'd be annoyed that it made me think it was trying to tell a story the whole time. It's a really hard thing to evaluate because I really don't understand everything and I don't think I'm supposed to. So I can't talk about story conveniences and plot holes and even character inconsistencies, like, for instance, Jezebel, his girlfriend, who is sometimes really sympathetic to what he's going through, and sometimes she turns around and is totally unreasonable and insufferable. I mean, is she out of character in those moments, or is that inconsistency intentional? I don't know. But I think some of what happens must be real. I don't think it's entirely in Jacob's mind. I don't think it's just a collection of crazy dreams. That would be the cop-out. It's ambiguous, to be sure, and frustratingly so. I think there's a lot of possible interpretations. That's a totally valid read, that it's just all in his head. And if it is that, regardless of how successful the movie is in various moments, I would cry foul. But, and this is just a gut feeling, I think what he learns about the drug must be absolutely true somehow. And I think there is a real cover-up. All of that watches like the movie communicating concrete information to me, while other scenes watch more surreal. I don't think most of the movie is a dream version with the picture-perfect life he's having, and I don't think he's really in an insane asylum. If anything is actually happening, even though, again, we know he's apparently dead, it's gotta be the bulk of the film where he's with Jezebel, and he's hallucinating the facial sky and the tentacles and all of that stuff because of the drug. Like maybe a flash forward where he hasn't accepted his death yet, so he somehow is able to return to his life to take care of unfinished business? Question mark? But here's what I think is a lot more likely. And again, I don't know if I'm right about this. I think we're maybe looking at 3 different fake realities that he's experiencing after death. Not that it's all in his head, not that it's like he's in a coma, but that he's in an afterlife. And so it's all based on real life because it's created by the celestial. God or the universe or whatever would know things Jacob doesn't know, like what the drug was in Nam. So the life he lives with Jezebel, where the main action happens, is purgatory, which is why it's both good and bad sometimes. His personal purgatory is influenced by his experiences, but also his fears and insecurities. He has to let go of what happened to him in Nam before he can cross over. And then he gets sample of heaven, that perfect reality with his wife and 3 kids. Kind of like the Nexus in Star Trek Generations with Picard in Christmas. And then he also goes to hell, the insane asylum. And at the end, when he realizes he's dead, through numerous clues were given throughout, including a palm reader who tells him he's dead already in the first, half hour of the movie, he decides to stop pursuing the latter, the drug he was given, and to move on, climbing something like the biblical Jacob's ladder to heaven, represented by the staircase he follows his son up. Now, that is the closest thing to a read on the actual plot I've got. A purgatory that makes you think it's real, to challenge you to choose to let go. But I'm not sure. All I know is that I have never seen a movie quite like this, and that it still watches really unique and inventive 30 years later. It is uncomfortable. It's not a thing I see myself going back to frequently. I didn't find it as relentless as something like Apocalypse Now, which is another Vietnam movie. But like that, it's a thing that I found really unsettling and that I didn't immediately want to go back to and watch. Like I was just having this great time with it. But while I was watching it, it made me think about a lot of heavy existential ideas. It made me appreciate being alive through the unsettling experience of feeling what death might be like, which is an accomplishment. It's a little David Lynch-esque for my taste, but I'm surprised that I still respect it as much as I do, regardless of how open-ended and impenetrable the story is. I didn't enjoy this viewing, that's not the right word, but I was totally wrapped up in it. So I have to flip my sign green. Where's my sign? Oh, here it is. I have to flip my sign green and say, I'm feeling it. So I want to say thanks again to Joseph Karutz for asking me to review this movie on Patreon. And if you would like to make me watch or read something, either a movie or a comic for the Comic Vault, you can become a $15 patron at patreon.com/geekvolution. You can do that just one time. Let that roll over for a month and you'll get in the queue. And I should have a video for you in 2 to 3 months. I've always got a backlog because there's some folks there that stick around all the time, and if you want to stay on the queue, you'll have a spot that is reserved, and again, every 8 to 12 weeks, you'll get a new review. So up to you, a one-time thing, or you can stick around on it, and I sure appreciate all the support from everybody who has done that, and who is currently there on Patreon. You guys are wonderful, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments, let me know if you've seen this movie and what you think of it, and I'd love to hear other interpretations, and in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and I'll see you again in a week. Later, folks.